The Girl Beside the Myth. A character study from Great are the myths. At the center of Great are the myths stands a girl with an unusually delicate name, Birdie Darling. At first glance, she might appear to belong to a long tradition of literary heroines. Sensitive, perceptive, slightly romantic, the sort of character through whose eyes the reader encounters the world. Yet, Birdie is doing something far more structurally significant than simply narrating events. She's not only the protagonist of the novel, she's the consciousness through which the entire moral and emotional architecture of the book becomes legible. The story unfolds against the backdrop of post-war America at the moment when modern celebrity culture begins to take shape. One of Birdie's childhood companions will eventually become a figure of global myth. Yet the novel does not belong to the mythic figure at its center. It belongs to the girl who stands beside him. Birdie is the one who observes, remembers, interprets, and ultimately understands what myth does to the people who live near it. In this sense, Birdie is not merely a character within the story. She is the human scale of the novel. Through her consciousness, vast cultural forces, fame, gender, class, beauty, power, become intimate and emotionally intelligible. The meaning of a name. Birdie Darling. Names in literature often function as small symbolic keys, and Birdie's name is unusually rich in implication. The first half of the name, Birdie, immediately evokes a creature that is light, alert, and mobile. Birds are associated with flight, song, and migration. They occupy the margins of human space, observing from branches, windowsills, and rooftops. They are present but never entirely contained. This image resonates strongly with Birdie's position in the novel. She moves through the world with a kind of watchful attentiveness, noticing details that others overlook. She's not the most powerful figure in any room, nor the most socially dominant. Yet she possesses a quiet observational intelligence that allows her to perceive emotional undercurrents long before others do. There is also something childlike about the name. Birdie sounds like a nickname that has somehow become permanent. It carries within it a trace of girlhood even as the character grows. Older. The result is subtly poignant. The reader continues to hear the echo of childhood in the name long after Birdie herself has entered more complex emotional terrain. The second half of the name, Darling, introduces a different set of associations. The word suggests affection, intimacy, and tenderness, but it also evokes literary memory. One cannot easily hear the name Darling without recalling Wendy Darling from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, the girl who stands on the threshold between childhood imagination and adult responsibility. Like Wendy, Birdie occupies a liminal position between innocence and knowledge. She is young enough to believe in the enchantments of the world, yet perceptive enough to recognize their fragility. The name, therefore, contains a quiet tension between freedom and sentimentality. Birdie is both the small creature capable of flight and the cherished girl who is expected to remain lovable. The novel subtly explores this tension. Birdie is adored, admired, and desired, but she is never fully contained by those expectations. Her life unfolds according to instincts that are often independent of the social scripts surrounding her. The singular child. Birdie also belongs to a literary lineage that is particularly strong in Northern European storytelling. The figure of the singular child who moves through the world without the full protection or supervision of conventional family structures. The most famous example of this tradition is Pippi Longstocking, created by Astrid Lindgren. Pippi is an anarchic, joyful character who lives largely outside the rules of adult society. Scandinavian literature for children has often embraced this type of figure, a child who possesses unusual autonomy, a heightened moral sensitivity, and a capacity to perceive adult absurdity with startling clarity. In Denmark, writers such as Olin Kierkegaard similarly explored the imaginative lives of children navigating adult worlds that often seem irrational or unfair. Birdie is not comic or rebellious in the overtly anarchic way Pippi is. She is more interior, more reflective, and more socially embedded. Yet she shares the structural position of the partially unparented child, a young person whose relative freedom from strict adult oversight grants her a unique vantage point. Birdie moves through houses, cities, and social circles with a sense of both belonging and distance. She is loved and cared for by figures such as Miss Mary and her grandfather, yet she remains in many ways a solitary observer. This solitude is not simply loneliness, it is also the condition that allows her to develop the deep perceptiveness that defines her character. Birdie, as witness to myth. One of the most striking structural decisions in Great Are the Myths is that the story of a rising cultural icon is told not by the mythic figure himself, but by the girl who grows up beside him. This narrative choice shifts the focus of the novel in a profound way. A mythic figure moves outward into spectacle. His story becomes one of amplification, larger audiences, louder music, brighter lights, expanding fame. Such a trajectory is inherently external. It belongs to history and public narrative. Birdie's story, by contrast, moves inward. Her development is not measured by increasing scale, but by increasing depth of perception. She learns to recognize contradictions within people. She learns to distinguish between appearance and emotional truth. She begins to understand the difference between the stories society tells about its heroes and the private realities those stories conceal. Because Birdie stands close to the myth without becoming it, she occupies a rare narrative position. She is both participant and observer. She experiences the enchantment of the myth from the inside while retaining the capacity to interpret it from the outside. In this sense, Birdie becomes the novel's archivist of the pre-mythic world. She remembers the ordinary moments that precede fame, childhood friendships, shared secrets, the texture of daily life before history begins to rewrite it. The quiet feminist. Another essential dimension of Birdie's character is her relationship to femininity and sexual experience. On the surface, Birdie possesses many qualities traditionally associated with the literary feminine ideal. She is attractive, socially intuitive, emotionally perceptive, and capable of great tenderness. She moves gracefully through social environments that might easily overwhelm a less sensitive character. Yet the novel quietly revises the moral expectations historically attached to such heroines. In many earlier narratives set in the mid-20th century, a young woman's sexual curiosity or emotional independence would be treated as a moral danger. Female characters who stepped outside strict codes of behavior were frequently punished by the story itself. Birdie is not. She experiences attraction, desire, and intimacy without the narrative imposing shame upon her. Her relationships with men are not framed as moral failures, but as part of the ordinary process of emotional discovery. This creates a subtle but significant form of feminism. Birdie does not articulate a political doctrine. She simply lives according to a deeply internalized sense that human intimacy is not inherently degrading for women. Her dignity does not depend upon ignorance or repression. The result is a heroine who retains a sense of innocence without requiring sexual naivete. Her moral worth is measured not by purity but by kindness, honesty, and emotional intelligence. Rooms and cottages. The architecture of inner life. One of the most quietly magical motifs associated with Birdie is her occasional discovery of unexpected rooms within houses. This recurring image carries powerful symbolic weight. In literature, houses often function as metaphors for the self or the mind. To discover an additional room within a familiar structure suggests the sudden awareness that reality contains more possibilities than previously imagined. Birdie moves through the world with the intuitive belief that hidden spaces exist, places of imagination, tenderness, and psychological expansion. The motif is echoed by another symbolic gesture. The boy builds a small cottage in her garden. The cottage stands in striking contrast to the monumental scale of celebrity culture. It is not a palace, not a stage, not a public monument. It is a small, handmade dwelling created for one person. In folklore and fairy tales, building a house for someone is an act of devotion and belonging. The cottage, therefore, represents a private world carved out within the larger machinery of myth. It is the opposite of spectacle, intimate, personal, and ephemeral. The cottage and the hidden rooms together form a quiet architectural metaphor for Birdie's life. She inhabits a world that constantly expands, emotionally, intellectually, imaginatively, even as external circumstances grow increasingly complex. Birdie's moral vision. Perhaps the most distinctive element of Birdie's character is her approach to human imperfection. Birdie possesses a rare kind of moral generosity. She instinctively assumes that human beings are flawed. When people behave badly, she is rarely shocked. When they behave well, however, she experiences genuine delight. This attitude creates a tone of gentle humanism throughout the novel. Birdie does not judge others harshly. She observes them with curiosity and sympathy. Her moral philosophy might be summarized as follows. Human beings are contradictory creatures. When kindness appears, it is something to celebrate. This outlook allows her to remain attached to people even when she recognizes their weaknesses. It also prevents the narrative from collapsing into cynicism. Birdie sees the world clearly, but she refuses to interpret clarity as bitterness. A Proustian consciousness. In literary terms, Birdie's development resembles what might be called a Proustian Bildungsroman. She does not simply grow older, she grows more conscious. Her emotional trajectory moves through several stages. Curiosity, enchantment, attachment, disillusionment, understanding, sad acceptance. This progression transforms Birdie into the kind of consciousness capable of narrating the past. By the end of the novel, she has learned to interpret her experiences with a degree of lucidity that was impossible during the events themselves. Like the narrator of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, Birdie ultimately discovers that memory is not merely a record of events, but a tool for understanding them. Conclusion. Why the story belongs to Birdie. The mythic figure at the center of Great, or the myths will eventually belong to history. His image will circulate through music, film, and collective memory until it becomes larger than the individual who once inhabited it. Birdie, by contrast, belongs to literature. She is the consciousness that remembers what the myth looked like before it hardened into legend. She preserves the fragile human moments that public history tends to erase. Through Birdie, the novel becomes not merely a story about fame, but a meditation on how myths are experienced by the people who stand beside them. She is the bird who observes from the edge of the stage, the darling who remains human within a world of spectacle, and the narrator whose quiet intelligence transforms memory into meaning. Without Birdie, the myth would remain dazzling but empty. Through her, it becomes a story about love, perception, and the slow education of the heart. Birdie Darling, in literary context. Comparative notes for Great are the myths. One useful way to understand Birdie Darling is to situate her within a wider lineage of literary protagonists. She does not emerge in isolation. Rather, she belongs to a tradition of characters who occupy a delicate position, observers moving through complex social worlds while slowly developing the consciousness required to interpret them. Birdie's uniqueness lies in the way several literary traditions intersect within her. The Scandinavian singular child, the socially perceptive heroine of Henry James, the sensuous female narrators of Colette, and the reflective witnesses to glamour found in the novels of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Examining these parallels reveals more clearly what Birdie is doing in Great are the myths. The Scandinavian singular child. Birdie's position as a partially unparented child places her within a distinctive Northern European storytelling tradition. Many Scandinavian narratives center on children who move through adult worlds with unusual autonomy and perception. The most famous example is Pippi Longstocking, created by Astrid Lindgren. Pippi is a figure of exuberant independence, living outside conventional social structures and exposing the absurdities of adult authority. Danish children's literature contains similar figures. Writers such as Ole Lund Kierkegaard frequently portrayed children navigating adult environments with a mixture of vulnerability, wit, and emotional clarity. Birdie is not anarchic in the way Pippi is. Her temperament is more reflective, and she moves within rather than outside elite social circles. Yet she shares the structural condition of the singular child. A young person whose partial independence from parental oversight grants her a unique observational vantage point. This position allows Birdie to notice emotional undercurrents that remain invisible to more fully socialized characters. She is neither entirely protected nor entirely abandoned. Instead, she inhabits a liminal space that fosters perceptiveness. The social observer, Henry James. Birdie's role as a witness to complex social dynamics also places her within the tradition of the Jamesian heroine. In novels by Henry James, young women often enter intricate social worlds where power, wealth, and emotional manipulation coexist beneath polished surfaces. Characters such as Isabel Archer in The Portrait of a Lady must gradually learn to interpret these environments. James was deeply interested in consciousness, particularly the moment when a character realizes that the world operates according to hidden rules. Birdie performs a similar function in Great Are the Myths. As she moves through the environments of Memphis, elite schools, and glamorous social circles, she gradually becomes aware of the structures shaping the people around her. She learns that charm may conceal ambition, that glamour often masks loneliness, and that social power frequently depends upon unspoken hierarchies. What distinguishes Birdie from many Jamesian heroines, however, is the warmth of her perception. Henry James's characters sometimes become paralyzed by the complexity they observe. Birdie, by contrast, retains emotional generosity even as her understanding deepens. The feminine interior. Colette. Another illuminating comparison is the work of Colette, whose novels often center on female narrators exploring desire, beauty, and emotional independence. In books such as Cherry, Colette examined the ways women move through social worlds structured by male power while maintaining a private sense of autonomy. Birdie shares with Colette's heroines an instinctive acceptance of sensuality and affection as natural aspects of life. Her emotional and sexual experiences are not framed as moral transgressions, but as part of the process of self-discovery. This quality gives Birdie a quietly modern sensibility despite the historical setting of the novel. She does not articulate a formal feminist philosophy. Instead, she simply refuses to internalize the idea that female dignity depends upon repression. In this respect, Birdie embodies a form of lived feminism, a belief in the legitimacy of female experience that emerges organically from her character rather than from ideological argument. Witnessing glamour, Fitzgerald. The final literary comparison that illuminates Birdie's role is the work of F. Scott Fitzgerald, particularly The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald's narrator, Nick Carraway, stands beside, rather than inside the mythic figure at the center of the story. Nick observes Jay Gatsby's ascent into glamour while gradually recognizing the fragility and illusion embedded within that world. Birdie occupies a similar narrative position. She grows up beside a young man who will eventually become a global icon, yet the novel belongs not to the icon but to the person who remembers what he was before the myth solidified. There is, however, an important difference. Nick Carraway often maintains a tone of ironic detachment. Birdie does not. Her observations emerge from emotional involvement rather than distance. She loves the world she describes even as she begins to understand its contradictions. This gives Great Are the Myths a warmer emotional texture than Fitzgerald's more elegiac portrayal of the Jazz Age, a Proustian structure of memory. Birdie's development ultimately aligns most closely with the tradition of psychological memory narratives. The novel's structure resembles the reflective consciousness found In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, where the narrator gradually realizes that memory itself is the mechanism through which life acquires meaning. Birdie does not fully understand the events surrounding her while they occur. Only later, through recollection and reflection, does she recognize their emotional significance. This retrospective perspective allows the novel to function simultaneously as a coming-of-age story and as an exploration of how memory transforms experience into narrative, the convergence of traditions. What makes Birdie Darling distinctive is the way these traditions intersect within a single character. She is simultaneously the singular Scandinavian child observing adult worlds, the socially perceptive heroine of the Jamesian tradition, the quietly autonomous female consciousness found in Colette, the witness to glamour, reminiscent of Fitzgerald's narrators, and the reflective memory keeper in the lineage of Proust. Yet Birdie is not reducible to any of these models. She combines their qualities while remaining unmistakably her own creation. Why Birdie matters. Ultimately, Birdie's significance lies in the kind of narrative intelligence she embodies. The mythic figures of history often dominate cultural memory because their stories are spectacular, yet spectacle rarely reveals the human cost of myth-making. Birdie performs the opposite function. She restores intimacy to a world increasingly shaped by public legend. Through her attention to emotional nuance, small gestures, and private moments, she preserves the fragile human reality that myth tends to erase. In doing so, she transforms what might otherwise have been a story about celebrity into something far more enduring, a meditation on how individuals experience history while it is still unfolding around them. Birdie Darling, the small observing bird at the edge of the stage, ultimately becomes the figure who gives the myth its emotional meaning. The moral philosophy of Birdie Darling, a companion reflection. If Birdie Darling functions as the emotional intelligence of great are the myths, then it is worth asking what kind of moral vision she represents. Birdie is not a philosopher in the formal sense. She does not articulate doctrines, nor does she present herself as someone attempting to judge the world around her. Yet throughout the novel, she exhibits a remarkably consistent ethical orientation, one that quietly shapes the tone of the entire narrative. What distinguishes Birdie most clearly is the way she approaches human imperfection. From an early age, Birdie seems to possess an instinctive understanding that people are flawed. She rarely expects purity, heroism, or moral consistency from those around her. The adults she observes are often contradictory. The friends she grows up with behave unpredictably. Even the young man who will eventually become a cultural icon reveals moments of tenderness alongside moments of carelessness. Birdie notices all of this, but she does not respond with condemnation. Instead, she approaches human behavior with a kind of gentle realism. If people fail, she accepts it as part of the ordinary condition of being human. What surprises her is not failure but goodness. When kindness appears, an unexpected gesture, a moment of loyalty, a quiet act of generosity, Birdie experiences something close to delight. This orientation creates a subtle moral framework within the novel. Birdie does not idealize people, yet she refuses to abandon them to cynicism. She understands that individuals are rarely identical with the roles they play in public life. The glamorous figure admired by crowds may be insecure in private. The socially powerful adult may be emotionally fragile. The admired hero may be capable of great tenderness one moment and thoughtless behavior the next. Birdie accepts these contradictions without attempting to resolve them. Her philosophy might be summarized in a single quiet assumption: human beings are complex, and therefore deserving of patience. This perspective has important consequences for the way the story unfolds. Because Birdie does not judge people too quickly, she remains open to the possibility that they might surprise her. The world remains emotionally alive. It also means that the novel avoids the bitterness that often accompanies stories about fame and power. Birdie sees clearly the asymmetries between men and women in the world she inhabits. She recognizes the privileges afforded to male ambition and the constraints placed upon female lives. Yet even this recognition does not harden her into resentment. Instead, it sharpens her understanding of the fragile kindnesses that sometimes emerge within those structures. Birdie's moral outlook, therefore, contains a kind of quiet courage. It is easy to become cynical when confronted with human inconsistency. It is much harder to remain attentive to moments of goodness without denying the surrounding imperfections. Birdie manages both. Her generosity of perception allows her to continue loving the world even as she begins to understand it more clearly. This moral stance also explains why she is such a compelling narrator. Readers instinctively trust characters who possess the ability to see faults without exaggerating them. Birdie's observations feel humane rather than punitive. She does not present herself as morally superior to the people around her. Instead, she places herself within the same flawed human community. In doing so, she models a form of ethical maturity that emerges not from strict rules, but from emotional intelligence. Her sympathy does not come from naivete, it comes from attention. By the end of Great Are the Myths, Birdie has lost certain illusions about the world she grew up in. She has witnessed how myth can transform ordinary lives into public spectacle. She has seen relationships altered by fame, ambition, and the passage of time. Yet she retains the quality that defined her as a child, the ability to recognize goodness when it appears, and to greet it with quiet joy. This, perhaps, is Birdie Darling's most enduring lesson. In a world inclined toward myth and judgment, she reminds us that the most radical form of understanding may simply be the willingness to see people clearly and still be glad when they're kind. Birdie and the education of the heart. The final reflection on great are the myths. If the earlier essays in this series have examined the themes of great or the myths, myth-making, masculinity, geography, houses, fame, class, and memory, then the final question becomes a simpler one. What is the novel actually about? At its deepest level, the story is about the gradual education of a human heart, and the heart being educated belongs to Birdie Darling. Birdie begins the novel as a girl standing at the edge of a new world. She arrives in America young enough to see everything with a mixture of wonder and confusion. The country appears vast, energetic, full of promise. Its landscapes and social rituals are strange to her, yet they possess an undeniable magnetism. The early chapters of the novel are therefore shaped by a sense of openness. Birdie encounters people and places without fully understanding their significance. She absorbs impressions, the warmth of Memphis evenings, the rituals of houses and families, the friendships that form among young people who feel that life is only just beginning. In these moments, the world still feels simple. But as Birdie grows older, the world begins to reveal its complexities. The first lesson, the world is not simple. The first stage of Birdie's education is the discovery that the world does not operate according to the innocent assumptions of childhood. She begins to see that social structures exist beneath the surface of daily life. Class distinctions shape relationships. Gender expectations determine which futures seem available and which do not. Power circulates quietly through rooms in ways that are rarely acknowledged aloud. Birdie's intelligence is not abstract. It is perceptive. She notices these patterns gradually, through experience rather than theory. The elite schools she attends introduce her to social codes that govern behavior, speech, and aspiration. Summers spent in grand houses reveal the subtle hierarchies of wealth and belonging. Cities such as New York and Los Angeles expose the dazzling but unstable worlds of ambition and glamour. At first, these environments appear alluring. Over time, Birdie learns that every structure, no matter how beautiful, contains invisible pressures. The second lesson, myth and reality. Running parallel to Birdie's personal development is the rise of the boy who will eventually become a global cultural figure. For the world outside the novel, his story will become a legend. But Birdie knows him before the legend exists. She knows the shy young man who dreams of something larger than the life around him. She knows the moments of tenderness, uncertainty, and generosity that precede fame. She sees the human being who exists beneath the image that history will later construct. This position gives Birdie a rare vantage point. She is present at the moment, when myth begins to form. From a distance, myths appear solid and inevitable. But from within lived experience, they emerge gradually, almost accidentally, out of ordinary circumstances. Birdie watches as the boy's life begins to shift under the pressure of public attention. She sees how admiration can transform into expectation, how success can alter relationships, and how the myth that others desire can slowly eclipse the person who once existed before it. Her education, therefore, includes a profound realization. Myths are built from human lives, but they rarely preserve those lives intact. The third lesson, the fragility of love. Birdie's emotional education is inseparable from her experiences of love and friendship. The relationships she forms during her youth carry an intensity that feels absolute at the time. The friendships between the girls possess the charged intimacy of shared adolescence. The romantic connections she experiences seem capable of shaping entire futures, yet time introduces a quiet alteration. Some relationships deepen, others fade. Some reveal unexpected loyalties, others dissolve under pressure. The emotional geography of Birdie's life shifts as circumstances change. This process teaches her a difficult truth. Affection alone cannot prevent transformation. People grow. Their ambitions diverge. the environment surrounding them exert their own gravitational pull. Birdie learns that love is not a guarantee of permanence. Instead, it is something more delicate, a moment of genuine connection that exists within time rather than outside it. Houses and landscapes. Throughout Birdie's journey, physical spaces play an essential symbolic role. The houses she inhabits reflect different versions of life. Her grandfather's home offers stability and care. The elegant summer residences of the East Coast reveal the rituals of inherited wealth. Urban apartments in New York and Los Angeles introduce a more restless world shaped by ambition and spectacle. Birdie also possesses the peculiar habit of discovering unexpected rooms within houses. These moments carry a subtle, symbolic resonance. Each newly discovered room suggests that reality is always larger than the structures we believe we understand. Similarly, the small cottage built for her by the boy represents a fleeting sanctuary, a private space of affection that exists briefly within a world increasingly dominated by public myth. The houses in the novel therefore map Birdie's interior development. Each environment corresponds to a stage of her emotional education. The fourth lesson: human imperfection. Perhaps the most important stage of Birdie's development occurs when she begins to recognize the depth of human imperfection. As a child, she already possesses an instinctive sympathy for others. But adulthood sharpens this perception. She observes the contradictions within people she cares about. Friends reveal vulnerabilities they once concealed. Adults display weaknesses that childhood admiration had previously obscured. Yet Birdie's response to these discoveries is not bitterness. Instead, she adopts a quietly generous philosophy. People are flawed, and therefore moments of kindness are precious. This perspective allows her to remain emotionally open, even as she becomes more perceptive. She accepts imperfection without surrendering her capacity for affection. It is here that Birdie's moral character becomes fully visible. The final lesson: clarity without cynicism. By the end of the novel, Birdie has acquired a form of knowledge that cannot be learned quickly. She understands how myths are created. She recognizes the structures of class and gender that shape the world around her. She has experienced the beauty and fragility of love. She has seen how time alters relationships and expectations. In many stories, such knowledge produces cynicism. Birdie arrives somewhere different. Her final emotional position might best be described as sad clarity. She sees the world clearly enough to recognize its illusions, yet she refuses to abandon her capacity for tenderness. She accepts the limitations of human life without allowing those limitations to extinguish her sense of wonder. This is the true meaning of the novel's title. Myths are powerful, but they are not the ultimate truth. The deeper story lies in the human experiences that surround them, the friendships, the quiet acts of devotion, the fleeting sanctuaries built within larger histories. Birdie's education teaches her to recognize both the beauty and the fragility of these moments. The quiet ending. The novel concludes not with spectacle, but with a quiet form of resolution. The boy moves into history, becoming part of a myth that will belong to the world. Birdie moves into adulthood. Her life continues in forms that appear outwardly conventional: marriage, motherhood, the rhythms of domestic life. Yet the simplicity of this ending is deceptive. Birdie carries within her the entire history of what she has witnessed. She has seen how myths are born, how relationships evolve, and how human beings struggle to remain themselves within larger narratives. Her life may appear quieter than the mythic career unfolding elsewhere, but it contains something equally valuable: the hard-won knowledge of a heart that has learned how to see. The true subject of the novel. In the end, Great Are the Myths is not primarily a story about fame or history. It is the story of a girl who grows into a woman capable of understanding the world without surrendering her humanity. Birdie Darling, the small observant bird standing beside the myth, becomes the consciousness through which the novel transforms spectacle into meaning. Her education is not the acquisition of power or status. It is the far more difficult achievement of learning how to live with clarity, compassion, and memory. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring myth of all. The quiet belief that understanding the world might still allow us to love it.